energy before in your second chapter. Yeah, the different types of technology and power and energy sources was something that we went through. So a few areas here that we are going to go through may not necessarily be too foreign to you, and you may have gone through some of this before. Yeah. All right. Doesn't look like everyone is here, but I want to proceed anyway. 64 of you are here. Yuan Ming's hand is still raised. And let's proceed. So when it comes to power and energy resources, it is important for us to explore a bit of this because it is something that is supporting all of the aspects of technology that we speak of today, right? Every area of technology that we talk about will always go back into identifying the different types of power and energy, the different forms of power and energy, understanding how battery capacity works because it affects all areas of a particular technology. It doesn't matter what type that we are speaking about. Yeah. So as part of your learning outcome, you see define power and energy here, understanding the overall form of energy and looking at energy resources. And of course, looking at how energy is actually transformed in many ways rather than it is being created or rather it is something that is being that can be destroyed or created. It is actually looking at something that can be transformed and transferred. Key terms of it, the first 5, 6 then is something that you're already familiar with. So that defining power, defining energy, looking at the different types of energy, different forms of energy from kinetic to potential, solar, wind, the two major categories, right? That we are always being, that you are in by common sense and general knowledge you are already aware of. And of course, looking to some terminologies that is being used in relation to these energy types. So first and foremost, of course, looking at power, right? So power is a form of measurement. So if you remember, I highlighted this to all of you before, right? And the easiest one for you to relate to, and I'm assuming most of you are aware of it, is your own electricity usage at home, right? So how is it being measured? It is being measured in relation to power, right? The quantity of energy transferred. All right, so this alone tells you basically what power is about. Of course, the rate of you doing work, right? So that's why it is being calculated against time most of the time. Basically is always calculated against time. So it is being highlighted as power and its energy spent per time unit. Yeah. So what is your understanding on the term energy? So we'll quickly go through this question that you see here. So when you see the word energy, what comes to mind, right? So there can be a lot of different definitions that come from this. It can be a lot of different ways of looking at this. It can be something that is natural. It can be something that is not natural, which is man-made. But there are other areas as well. So I just wanted to quickly hear from you. We'll just spend maybe the next 30 seconds waiting for some of your responses. So someone is saying energy is power, right? So I just showed you just now, power is then relating to basically the amount, all right, the rate of work, the amount measured against time. So energy is slightly a bit different. So it says here, ability to do something, light, power, something that powers something. Electricity is energy, stamina, resources, gives power, something that can be renewable. That's one aspect of it, but there are some form of energy which that is not renewable as well, right? E equals to PT. Oh, all right. So energy equals to power times time. I'm assuming that's what Zian is trying to say. All right. So going back to a bit of physics of what you've covered before. All right. So different angles and different ways of looking at it. Yeah. The output of something, the power to do something. Okay, all right, awesome. I'll leave it as it is. Let's move on. Let's proceed. So when we speak about energy, I think it goes back into the different forms of energy. The discussion always goes back into the different forms of energy. Yeah. So someone mentioned electrical earlier. Someone mentioned solar and light energy as well, right? So there's heat, there's sound, there's kinetic, gravitational, potential, or kinetic energy as highlighted earlier. But this diagram that I wanted to share with you, I felt it gives quite a good relation across all those different forms of energy. Right? So what do batteries fall under? Where does food, what kind of energy does food provide? And some which are considered gravitational. What does that mean? Gravitational also connects directly towards kinetic energy, right? So when you look at the terminologies and the words itself, you can then see that when we are discussing about areas of technology, a lot of them must then consider what forms of energy do they use, right? And how does that affect the performance overall? So as you can see here, the definition of the top, ability to cause a change in a matter, right? Which most of the time refers to the change here is the change in terms of movement, right? So the law of conservation of energy here is the one I just highlighted earlier. Energy can never be made or destroyed. It is basically just being transformed. It changes its form from one to another. All right. Okay. It can just make the energy it needs. It is basically looking into how this energy can be stored and can be used later. That's basically it. Yeah. So the conversion of it is definitely from one form to the other. As much as you see, look at a car, and there's a lot of different components to it. It is one component storing energy in one form and then transferring it into a different form, which then basically takes it towards kinetic energy and so on and so forth, from chemical and converting it into different forms of energy that we then see and use today. Right? So identifying the different forms of energy, you saw a few there earlier already, right? So there is maybe one or two here that you did not see highlighted earlier in that infographic. So mechanical is one as well, kinetic, potential, solar, light, electrical, chemical. One of the more popular forms of energy or types of energy that you see here, there is the few basic ones that is always being looked at, right? And it's always being referred to as mechanical or electrical, in this case, electromagnetic energy as well. Now, based on all this, right, I think that's why there is a lot of discussion in terms of how should all of our technologies be powered today? Yeah. Whenever you are considering a new device, a smartphone, for example, discussion of the battery of your smartphone is always a major discussion. Yeah. What is the capacity like? Milliamp per hour, for example, what is how much of stored energy can there be in your smartphone? Right? So that's one consideration. But of course, on the other hand, a lot of phones today also discusses a lot about the charging rate of your phones, right? So a lot of those will then convert back into, for you to try understanding that the performance of the technology is relying a lot on power and energy resources. Okay. Kinetic, of course, simple, is the energy of motion overall. Yeah. The faster an object is moving, the more kinetic energy it has, right? So of course, this is just a random example to then show that an airplane flying through the air has more kinetic energy in comparison towards a person riding a bicycle. Yeah, all right. So Tina is asking in the chat, isn't nuclear in the same category? Nuclear, oh, okay, all right. Isn't nuclear in the same category of chemical and energy? Yeah. So nuclear can be considered in chemical energy, but because the process is a bit different, we'll cover a bit of it after this as well. Yeah, because of the process that is involved with nuclear energy may not be necessarily chemical, right? As I've highlighted earlier, nuclear has its own process on how it basically works. All right, so that's why I think you see then a difference here across nuclear energy and chemical, because the processes on how you get energy from nuclear processes is different from how chemical basically works. Yeah, that's why they have their own terminology as well. And one is called fusion, and the other one is called fission energy that comes from nuclear. Yeah, so that's why it's differentiated. Potential energy, of course, here is the one that you will always see that it is always then related towards the location. Some aspect of gravitational energy is being spoken about here, right? So this is always being referred to in terms of the higher location of this object is, right? A ball on a roof has more potential energy than a ball on your desk because it can basically fall further. It has a more distance than build up in terms of the energy that it basically has. Yeah. I'm not sure if all of you have seen this experiment before, whereby if you basically drop 1 kilogram of rocks from a same distance with 1 kilogram of feather. Yeah. Which one do you think will fall first? Which one do you think will reach the bottom first? Think about it. Yeah, I just want you to think about that as well. Maybe you're speaking about potential energy. So distance is the same, yeah. We're not talking about different distance. I'm just talking about 1 kilogram of rocks, and then the other one is 1 kilogram of feathers. Yeah. So which one will basically reach the bottom first if you're dropping them at the exact same height, right? So potential energy has a lot to do with that. But if you notice, potential energy works very closely with kinetic energy as well, right? So potential energy is at its maximum at the top of it, but as it goes down, it is increasing in terms of the kinetic energy that is built up as according to the distance that it falls. Yeah, all right. So what is Dinesh says the 1 kg of rocks should fall first onto the ground. Sutesh is saying rocks as well. Wei Huan is saying if it's in a vacuum, both will fall together at the same time. Interestingly, yeah. I will leave you to think about that for a while to see if it sparks your curiosity enough to go and find out. All right, we are done with potential. We are done with kinetic and potential. Then we go into mechanical energy, right? So this is one of the earliest form of energy that was a combination of what you saw the two earlier, kinetic plus potential, right? So it's a combination of both because it's something that enables movement, right? Energy that we use every day to physically move things. So the simple example here is when you move your chair from one place to another, you are using mechanical energy. So it all started simply because we need to move something from point A to point B, right? So mechanical energy comes into the picture in order to see how can you easily transfer this and to enable movements to basically take place. So I think mechanical is a bit more straightforward. Solar, on the other hand, right? So as being highlighted here, energy that comes from the sun. Right, the word solar basically means of the sun. And when you're looking at solar energy and solar cells, even there has been a lot of improvements in terms of how solar energy can be harnessed. Right, even in Malaysia today, it may not be too popular when it comes to solar energy in Malaysia, simply because as much as we have sunlight here as well, but it is not as much of sunlight in comparison towards how much rain we have as well. And speaking about rain, as all of you are aware of, with currently what's happening, there are flash floods everywhere in many different locations, and therefore solar energy may not be something that we can harness enough per se. All right. Let's see. Sardar is saying, is there mass and weight and surface area, or is the mass and weight and surface area same or not? Okay, those information are not given. All I told you is that they are basically both 1 kilograms. El Alam is saying both should fall at the same time because both are 1 kilogram. Ah, interesting, right? Since both are 1 kilogram, shouldn't they just fall at the same time? Just because one is a rock, one is a feather. But if they are both the same weight, why shouldn't they fall at the same time? Interesting point, right? So when it comes to solar energy, in many ways, right, it is one form of energy that can be stored as well. One form or another, you are converting light energy into something else, right? And of course, the most direct one is whereby you are basically converting light energy into electricity, right? The one thing that you have to definitely be made aware of is that there are two forms of energy here that comes from solar, right? There are two forms of energy because then one will then be one can basically be in the form of light, and the other one can be in the form of thermal as well, right? So it can be the amount of light that is involved. On the other hand, in terms of the heat and the temperature that it brings. Okay, so light energy and energy you can see it moves in waves, right? So it moves in waves because you need to see that light has also in terms of what is the reach like, how far can it go, and so on and so forth, right? How big those waves are determine what type and the color of the light is, and then therefore shows in terms of how far can it basically travel, right? Those waves, however, are so small that they appear to be straight lines. The complicated part is that light moves in straight lines, not only when it's not moving through anything at all, right? So in this case, this is just trying to explain to you in terms of the movement of this type of energy does make a difference, because then utilization of it will basically get you to see how can it be properly utilized. So I see Sardar coming back in the chat. It varies as if their surface areas are different, then there will be difference in the resistance of their opposite force. Fine. So Sardar, let's not make things complicated. Let's say they are the same. So what will your answer be? Right? There are no other differences except for the material. One is a rock and one is a feather. Go figure. Yeah. So on top of light energy, as you can see, even light energy itself can be two different forms of it, right? Two different forms that comes from when it comes to light energy. I think if you just look at the two words, you automatically can see that what their differences are. So one is reflection and one is basically refraction of light as well. So the first one I think is simple enough, whereby it happens when light bounces off something, right? So if you notice, there are certain things around us when they are being created, it is considering light energy. Why are we able to see color? Why are we able to then define what color is something? Honestly, has a lot to do with with light energy around us, right? Because what is being reflected, we are then able to see certain things. All right. So as they always say, when it comes to reflection in terms of the water, why do when we see the ocean, we basically see in terms of the color of the ocean being blue, right? So when you're evaluating in that sense, then there's a lot of discussion going into it. For those of you who think that it is the reflection of the sky and therefore the ocean is blue, you are absolutely wrong. And I will leave it to you to go and find out if you are interested enough on why is the ocean blue, right? Refraction, on the other hand, now this one is then trying to look at how light basically passes on from one medium to another, right? Refraction, as you know, in terms of the terminology itself as well. So when this happens, what exactly happens is that the light will bend, right? So when the light bend and refract, it will then allow to then manipulate certain aspects of materials and so on and so forth. So the example given right at the end, for example, light will bend a different amount when it goes from air into glass than it does when it goes from air into water, for example, right? So these are important to consider because these are also forms of energy that you can then utilize and to be converted into other forms as well. Electrical, of course, the basics when it comes into everything else that we are aware of and something that powers almost every single thing that we use on a day-to-day basis. Yeah. So you see that, of course, from electricity, from current, but most importantly is this second point here. It's basically the movement of electrons. So for those of you who have taken physics back in school, that is you remember drawing these, you remember drawing your protons and your electrons and your nucleus and so on and so forth, right? So those are the certain aspect of it. So electrons are, of course, then particles that are found in atoms. The movement of these electrons will then create an electric current. Yeah, all right. Simple static electricity, for example, is being highlighted here. Have you ever walked across a rug on a dry day and then touched the doorknob? You probably felt electric energy in the form of a small shock. Static energy is then being transformed there. So if you notice, it's a transformation. It's basically the energy being transformed, being transferred through you as well as a medium towards where that energy is traveling towards. Okay. So Al Alam comes in and say, I think it's blue because the reflect of the sunlight with a question mark, right? I'm not going to respond to that. Like I said, I will leave it to you for you to go and explore to see whether if it is something interesting enough for you to find out. All right, so now this relates to something that Tina was asking about earlier. Isn't nuclear basically chemical energy? So chemical, in the other hand, is then, of course, energy that can be released because of certain chemical reaction. Yeah, the number one example of this is basically looking at how we as human beings consume food, right? When you consume the food that you consume, basically chemical reactions, certain processes take place, right? So as an example here was also highlighting things like if you burn, then what is the energy that is being released out of burning? Digestion, what energy can you obtain from digestion, right? So the food that we eat, chemical, basically some form of a chemical reaction takes place, and then energy can be consumed, right? So we then gain energy out of that. Muscles get energy, the potential energy stored in food, right, is always being considered chemical energy as well. So when it's released, it gives us kinetic energy to move, chemical energy in fuel used to keep this remote control helicopter flying in the air. So fuel is another form of chemical energy as well. So as I highlighted earlier, in terms of cars, you start off with chemical energy is being stored, it is then converted into something else. Yeah. Jamil says it has to do something with the spectrum because the water absorbs colors in the red part of the spectrum. I didn't realize that this question can go so far. Blue color is more scattered than the other colors when electromagnetic radiations are scattered. Interesting point by Fatih. Wei Huan comes in and says, oceanography, living ocean, ocean color. All right, so I will leave for all of you to go and check out that reference, that link that you see there. All right, now, I just wanted to show you this infographic because I feel it's quite relevant as we have been discussing earlier. You notice we have discussed across the different types of energy, right? So we started off with those two, potential and kinetic. So when you try dividing it across in terms of the way that we can try to segregate them into categories, you will notice everything over here is referring to kinetic energy, which is like energy of movement. Remember, like thermal, moving particles creating heat, mechanical, objects which are in motion, electrical, electrons which are basically moving, right, to then create electricity. So if you notice, all this does relate back to kinetic energy. On the other hand, if you look at chemical, you see nuclear or gravitational, all this is then referring to potential energy. Yeah, all right. I'm not sure what is Saad trying to share. I see is your screen is on. Your camera is on, Saad. So I'm not sure what's going on there. Did Saad just join class? I'm assuming that he just joined class then. So he decided to make an entrance as soon as he joined in. All right, so let me see. Wait a minute. I just got a message. Hold on, yeah. Okay, all right. Nothing to do with your class. Moving on. So the only one that sits right down the middle that does not relate directly as either potential, which is stored energy, kinetic, which is energy of movement, is where you see sound and light then sits in, right? So I think this gives us quite a good idea in terms of looking at where they come from and what are they based on mainly, what type of energy are they based on mainly, right? All right, so after discussing all of the energy on their own, at the end of the day, you notice here is that it's basically going across a conversion from one to the other, right? It's important to remember this line. Energy can neither be created or be destroyed. It is simply conversion and transformation from one form into another, right? Kinetic into heat, potential into kinetic, chemical into heat. So it's just a matter of the conversion of it. But on top of all that, of course, understanding that it can be stored, right? Just like how fuel can be stored in the car, and it will only be required to gain energy from it when the conversion basically happens, right? So that idea and that concept, which is what we always refer to the law of energy overall. Yeah. Camera mistakenly turned on. Sorry for that. All right, moving on. So this is one link that you see in there. You saw this image earlier. So I wanted to share this quickly with you because then there is a quick example for each of those energy that you see earlier. Some may not even be the one that I've covered as well. So this is an extended version of it as well. Yeah. So if some of you know about ThoughtCo, it's quite an interesting website. You can probably bookmark this from now on to use it to your advantage. You see additional ones here as well. So electromagnetic. You see ionization, so there are other additional types of energy covered here as well, right? So do remember that they are, to be honest, at the end of the day, just a way of how you are able to break down certain types of energy further. So the energy transfer of it is always from one form to the other. So as you can see here, a quick example given is that a hammer strikes a nail. So it converts from kinetic energy that is transferred from the hammer itself into the nail, right? So it's energy that is being transferred. So that's a very simple and yet straightforward concept that we can look at. So what are energy resources? So there are many, of course, resources around that we have of us. Solar has been definitely utilized a lot across the world in many different forms. But of course, the other sources that we have around us as well that can be used, from coal to wood to wind, water, food and electricity, all these are energy resources as we see it. So when we are trying to look at energy resources, it is then important for us to look at that there are different types of energy resources. Yeah, resources we use to generate energy or gives power or gives heat. So it depends on what exactly are you into what type of energy are you converting those resources into, right? Matter that stores energy is then usually called fuel. The two main classifications here under energy resources, conventional and non-conventional, may not be very common to everyone. But on the other hand, interestingly, so Tina also added on into the chat to say, oh, I just saw her chat went missing. So I do agree with that as well, because then biomass, I was just going into it, right? So biomass can also be considered in terms of a energy resource, right? So biomass can come from both aspects of it. It's not only in terms of waste, in terms of plants. It can be waste that comes from animals as well. It can be even waste that comes from humans as well, in terms of the things that we throw out, rubbish, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So when you look at conventional and non-conventional, you may not really relate it to something that you know. But when you look at non-renewable and renewable, then you realize you know them actually, right? So you have coal, oil, and natural gas, the top three non-renewable sources of energy that we have today. Until now, we are still relying, a good major percentage of the whole world is still relying on these three items: coal, oil, and natural gas. Yeah. The non-conventional resources are always going then towards the renewable resources that you are then aware of, right? So a lot of times you also hear people saying that this is what they call clean energy, right? So it's being considered clean energy because then it has much more lesser byproducts and of course the negative impact and effects of it overall. Okay. These sources have not been traditionally used as an energy source in the beginning. However, it will always be available in nature, and as we know, we are getting an abundance of it, and that's why it's considered that it is something that is renewable. Yeah. So just sharing with you this particular resource, right? So it is this is basically just highlighting to you power versus energy. So when you're comparing across the both, I think it's basically simple for you to see that there is a differentiation whenever you try looking into what power is and what basically energy is, right? So one is then measuring it against time on the other hand. This is also another link that is quite useful for you to look at. So it's an overall infographic of power versus energy. I'm hoping that this loads. All right, so it is from the source, and you saw the image earlier as well. So this is basically where it comes from, right? So as you can see, the main area on how to look at the difference across both of them is then looking at the amount of energy that is coming out, right? Okay, power battery equals to fast energy delivery. So how much energy are you utilizing at the end of the day? And power is then, of course, the rate of it across. So from that, we move on to the discussion of both renewable and non-renewable energy, right? So in this case, I think it's very important to then reflect that a lot of organizations are very concerned with this. Yeah, they are very concerned with this because when you look at the whole process of how we gain the energy that we get from all these resources, they all have their own pros and cons. They all have their own advantages and disadvantages. So you notice, obviously, for oil and gas, there's many other forms of it on what do we exactly utilizes it for. But of course, as I mentioned earlier, more importantly is that these energy sources are still making up the bigger bulk, right? Are still making up the bigger bulk of how we gain electricity today, right? I'm not sure how many of you are aware. So again, renewable, very common. You see hydropower from water, from wind, from sun, from heat, in terms of geothermal and biomass as well. If you will notice, nucleus is here. So as much as we have, nuclear has been the new type of energy a lot of countries and a lot of governments are going into, right? A lot of countries worldwide are considering nuclear, even though it is a non-renewable energy, because it is still basically an element that you find from Earth to then apply certain processes into it to then gain energy from it. But when it comes to nuclear, it is not renewable because it is not in an abundance that you will get unlimited of. It is still a limited amount when it comes to nuclear, right? So hopefully everyone is aware of that as of now. So when it comes to non-renewable energy resources, fossil fuels, as we would know, are the most popular, and that's they are popular because then what we get from them is what we are using the most today, which are going back to these three: coal, oil, as well as natural gas. Yeah. So the processing of fossil fuels is what that creates all these three byproducts that we see here, right? What we are trying to get of it is basically oil. However, as a byproduct, there is also natural gas that can still be used as well, right? And all these are then being considered non-renewable resources. Quick question to just ask everyone. You can respond through quizzes and to see, so how long more do you think all these non-renewable resources can last us? Yeah, put nuclear energy aside. So nuclear may be much longer compared to these first three, but these three are the ones that I want you to try guessing in terms of how long more do you think non-renewable resources will last. How long more is definitely important, yeah, because then it really then shows whether countries and different parts of the world, different regions of the world, are they really even preparing themselves for that? Yeah. I see a few answers coming in. Not long. Not long is not really telling how long. No more than 5 years. So Jet, well, probably I can tell you it's not that short. It's going to be much longer than that. So Shin Tian is saying 100 years. Okay, 10 years, more than 50 years. Oh, that's quite a huge range. Oh, I thought 100 was the highest. I see Jiawen here mentioning 150 years instead. All right. Now, if you do go and search online, oh wow, 200 years by Asfar and Jason. If you do go and search online, right, there is basically different schools of thoughts. Yeah. Some are estimating because then they are comparing it towards how are we utilizing it now. But on the other hand, there is also considerations to look at because there are so many conversions to other renewable resources, then the non-renewable resources is actually slowing down a lot. Therefore, it can last us longer, right? But the number give and take that everyone has been agreeing with is always, like what Fatih is mentioning here, is always between 50 to 100 years. But I can be honest with you, 10 years ago when I was studying about this and when my own lecturer and teacher was talking about it, they were also still mentioning about the same timeline, 50 to 100 years. Yeah. So that timeline has not changed much within the last few years. So thank you to those of you who has responded. I think, yeah, your numbers are revolving around all those anyway. Coal will last much more, 100 plus years. Okay. So when we are discussing about all this from non-renewable, of course, the renewable ones are the ones that is gaining a lot of attention today. Solar, hydroelectric, wind energy, right? Depending on where you are, it makes a huge difference. In Malaysia, we hardly have wind energy because of geographically where our location is. Therefore, you don't see wind energy being used at all, pretty much not at all here. But because we have rivers, hydroelectricity is used in a certain amount here in Malaysia, but again, at a very low percentage. And same thing goes with solar energy. Yeah. So if you are aware, I'm not sure how many of you have noticed it, maybe before this or you haven't gone to the airport enough. Maybe before that, yeah, maybe about 1 or 2 years ago, before COVID and everything, when you were traveling to the airport, I'm not sure how many of you have noticed that there are solar farms. Yeah, there are solar farms all around before you arrive at KLIA. Yeah, so these solar farms are basically they must come in that capacity, because like I told you, in Malaysia, yes, we have a lot of sun, but we also have a lot of rain. Therefore, the amount of energy that we can harness from solar, it needs to come in that quantity. That's why you even call them solar farms. That's how big they are, just to get enough energy for it to either be transferred or to be stored, and so on and so forth. Yeah, I will skip this question. I will go to this question instead. So on our discussion about energy resources, I think it's important to reflect in terms of, so what have you been doing and how can you help the environment? Yeah, so everyone knows non-renewable resources are bad, renewable resources are good, but on the other hand, what can an individual do? So if you are reflecting on yourself, what have you been doing to help the environment? Or if you're not doing anything at all, at least hopefully you can share in terms of what can you do, right? And after this question, I'm hoping that then you will start doing it. So the 3R, the most popular one is to reuse, to reduce, and recycle, right? So that can be definitely one way to go. Conserve and preserve, recycle, keep the environmental clear. But yeah, Yuan Ming, I'm asking exactly what. How can you do that is more of the concern. Interesting point by Bani, right? Planting trees as well. All of us, not just expecting your government and city council to do it, everyone can also do it their own. Again, 3R, throw litter in the bin. Yeah, good, Jamil, because I don't think litter belongs anywhere else. Clean up the ocean, interestingly, by Cheng Hao, right? So doing your part in doing so, being part of an NGO, for example, throw rubbish, grow plants, save water, right? So I just wanted to ask about this and to get all of you to respond, because I want you to see there are a lot of opportunities. Sometimes, or rather a lot of times, a lot of us as individuals will always say, oh, what can I do? I'm only one person. But here there is close to 40 of you who are sharing what can you do. Yeah, I cannot and not been doing, but will consider it. So Sadar is giving an answer that is not an answer, basically, right? Go green, recycle, plant trees, recycle. So along those lines, there are obviously things that you know you can basically do. Interestingly, even the one by Johnson saying fixing your own shoes instead of buying new one. It can be as simple as that. Yeah. All right, awesome. Go green, don't use plastic. Interesting point as well. All right, moving on. So we are reaching the end of it. So like I mentioned earlier, power and energy resources was mainly something I just wanted to run through quickly in relation towards you understanding that the different types of energy and resources is what powers all the technology that we have today. Okay, all right. So here is a link of lithium-ion batteries in terms of what can they do, why the advancement of that particular technology can actually change a lot of things, right? Things can become smaller. Our phones are not necessarily becoming thicker, but the battery capacity that we are having is becoming bigger, right? So it's those kind of changes that is basically there. So this was, even though this was 3 years ago, but you can see there's still a lot of opportunities for battery technologies as an energy resource that can actually affect how everything else works, right? So there are a lot of discussion about it in terms of how can we improve this. So this graph literally shows where we came from, right? Nickel cadmium is something that we were always using as a form of a battery. Now we are on lithium ion. But this graph honestly is talking about where we actually need to be instead, in terms of how efficient battery technology is. Yeah. I see someone mentioning, Jamil mentioning in the chat, help the world fight COVID. That shows that you're helping the environment. Okay, all right, fair enough. But of course, our discussion is more about energy and resources today, power and energy. Yeah. So I wanted to share this with everyone. I'm not sure how many of you knew it was going on, but Expo Dubai, which started from the 1st of October, which is now ongoing until the 31st of March 2022, featured a lot of areas into power and energy, into energy resources as well, right? So what is essentially very interesting about it is you can actually go into the different pavilions. Yeah. So as far as saying I went there, it's so good. Oh wow, nice. If I had the opportunity, to be honest, I would have gone to it. Unfortunately, I didn't have the opportunity. So there's a lot of almost every country, I would say, right? You see 191 results here. So all of the countries have basically proposed their own pavilion, right? And simply because we're in Malaysia, I will go to the one basically in Malaysia. And you see every country have their own projects per se to feature in certain areas. Yeah. For example, the one that comes from Malaysia is looking into energizing businesses, energizing today, energizing tomorrow, talking about sustainable development. And the pavilion basically showcases some areas and some examples of what we've been doing, right? So this link, it also takes you to the virtual expo itself. It's not just, of course, as much as Asfar saying it's fun going there, not all of us have the luxury to do so. So what you can do is then you can actually explore this on your own. And this is basically the full virtual tour what's going on. They even have ongoing events that has taken place. Some are for entertainment purposes, but then there are others as well, right? But the part that I like is that there are a lot of discussions about power and energy because it relates to sustainable development. It relates to basically securing the future overall. Yeah. So interestingly, I don't remember when I last visited this page. I don't see these. I don't see like all these snowflakes falling. But I guess because it's December and Christmas is this weekend, so now you see that as well. So you can actually scroll around, find out what are those areas and location. I'm not sure. As far did you visit the whole area? Did you explore? It looks huge, and I'm not sure if you can do everything in one day though. So from the entrance itself,
I
yeah.
didn't visit the entire place. The entire place is way too big for me to visit.
Sorry, Asfar?
Yeah, I didn't visit the entire place.
Which one did you visit then?
So I went to the Malaysian pavilion, which is, I think, in the Jubilee section. And I went to some of the smaller pavilions. And yeah, I also went to the Pakistani pavilions, basically in like small areas like that.
I see. All right. Interestingly. All right. So just to share with you, you can explore this on your own. It's basically there. So do take a look at that. And the other link that I shared, I think, yeah, this is the one that I've just shown you anyway. So that's basically it. All right. So I am going to give you a few more minutes after this on your own, whatever you need to go and do. I know some of you will need to take a break, go and take a quick bathroom break before the test starts, because then once the test starts, you basically have that 1 hour to do so. Again, please double check in terms of your access towards Moodle. You will see the class test will be made available to you at 5:30. Yeah. Oh, sorry, I have one more thing to do before you go into your class test, which is this week's weekly task. Yeah, this is something you're supposed to do across the break, because by the time you come back on the 10th of January, you are submitting this at the end of that week, right? So you still have basically a lot of time. So overall, what you need to do for week 7 is that you need to find an alternative. I think this is very straightforward. You will need to find an alternative to your technology. Yeah, there's two ways of looking at it, right? So can there be any replacements? And there are two ways to look at it, which are the replacement can be in terms of the raw material, right? In terms of the input into your technology, can there be a replacement to that? Or it can be just looking at your whole the technology as a whole in terms of your final product itself. Is there a total replacement in terms of that basically? Yeah. So the raw materials part of it, some examples are given here, right? So for some of you who are doing into areas of manufacturing technology, the materials can be different. Like the group that is doing on Tesla, for example, and to discuss about different types of batteries to be used in an electric car, right? So that can be considered changing your raw material. So all you are doing here is that, so Jamil is saying life is full of tests. Yep. I think every religion talks about it as well. Everything in life is about a test, right? And God is always testing us. But anyway, moving on. that would be another very long discussion. So some examples are given here. Like for example, if diamonds are the raw materials, there are alternatives today. There are what we call synthetic diamonds, which are man-made diamonds. Non-renewable energy is considered, in terms of the alternative to it is to use renewable instead. Chocolate, instead of using chocolate or cocoa, you have artificial preservatives today, where they give you the exact taste of chocolate, but you are not utilizing actual chocolate. Yeah, same thing goes with food, with artificial coloring, artificial flavoring, and so on and so forth, right? So when it comes to the final product itself, you just want to look at your product as a whole. For example, there's someone in class that doing about Grab, right? So Grab, you can't really evaluate raw material. There's nothing much to basically change there. But you're looking at Grab overall. You're looking at whether Grab can be, are there any replacements when it comes to Grab Pay, for example? Then you realize, of course, there's a lot of replacements, right? Even though they do something similar, but they are different in the sense of that they come from different organizations, they come from different companies, all right? Where can you then find, of course, the last point here is to compare your technology product with the alternative. The reason you're doing a comparison is because you want to see which one is doing better. Do not worry if you find an alternative, you compare it with your technology, you find out that the alternative is actually better. No issues with that. If you find out that yours is better, of course, no problem with that either. It doesn't mean that if you find an alternative and it is better than your technology, that means it's not good. Not necessarily so. Here, the only thing asked of you is to do a comparison. Now, one thing I've been noticing from everyone's weekly tasks, which I need to highlight to everyone, is that when you see the guide like this, I notice what all of you like to do is that you turn all of this into your subtopics. Now, please understand that not every single thing here will apply to you. Yeah, you will need to discuss as part of your group to see if it applies to you or not. I have noticed what all of you will do is that not everyone, but a lot of you will do is that, as you can see here, within your technology, can your raw materials be something else but still producing the same output? You actually copy this and you make it your subtopic, and then under it you start typing yes, we can replace blah 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 and so on. I do not want you to do that, yeah, because like I said, these are all just given as a guide. You're not supposed to literally copy paste from them and to use them as a subtopic. I know some of you will do that with this as well. Are there any replacement in terms of your final product? You paste it there as your subtopic, then you start answering it below. Some of these questions can be combined. Some of these guides are not necessarily applicable to your technology. You need to look at that and decide, right? Don't blindly just follow the guide. I've seen that as well. I've seen some of you who have literally used every word that is being seen here and using it as your subtopic. Not necessarily so. And even if you are, my suggestion is that you can word it on your own so that you are structuring your work accordingly. But this is not a literal word by word, point by point that you need to put into your weekly tasks. Yeah. The reason I'm saying that now is so that you are able to look at it in the bigger picture. Don't just look exactly at, oh, 2A, we must do this, so we must answer this. 2B is examples, we must answer this, we must show some examples. Not exactly, yeah? So please take this as a guide and not literally every single point and subtopic in it, okay? Done. Any questions about your alternative? So point 4 is important, yeah? After you find and you propose an alternative, you're comparing it together with your own technology to see if whether do they perform the same. You might compare and find out everything is the same, no problem. But a comparison will still need to be looked into, yeah? I think I've highlighted this before. Some of you has mentioned, can you identify a competitor as an alternative? Definitely, right? And a competitor is still basically an alternative to the technology itself. No questions? We are good. All right. I think that's basically it that I wanted to cover here. So weekly tasks is briefed. That is done there. I will go into your, I'm just going to quickly take your attendance now so that you do not need to bother about this later. And hopefully everyone is here. because I look at my time and there's about 10 minutes to go for your test. 74 of you, which means there's a few of you missing. So please be made aware that this is a test. You are not allowed to discuss it with each other. You're not allowed to do any of those in terms of trying to answer this together, right? It's really not advisable. And like I said before as well, when it comes to your essay question, you need to be careful with that, because if your answers are very similar to each other, it's going to be a problem later on as well. Yeah. So let's avoid those issues per se. Okay, after this, if you do text me, do understand that I may not necessarily reply on the spot, all right? Unless you are going through some issues with submitting it in or whatsoever. Do not wait until 6:30 p.m. for you to submit it, because you are just asking for trouble. There are no additional time given. Why am I saying this? Because this test actually takes you much lesser time to finish. So the 1 hour given to you, yeah, the 1 hour given to you is all the way, it's actually much more time than you need to complete this class test. 10 multiple choice, 1 essay, yeah, and the essay is only worth 10 marks. There's only one question anyway. So please look into that properly, manage your time properly. My students who have been getting A before, to be honest, it's not because they can read better and they remember things better than other students. It's just because they manage their time accordingly. They don't leave their essay right to the last 5 minutes and trying to complete it and it comes out looking like crap. Yeah. Manage your time appropriately. You know 1 hour is the amount of time you have, but my suggestion is do not leave it all the way right down to 6:30 to submit it, because you are basically just asking for trouble. If any one of you has connection issues by the time it comes to 6:30, you know I cannot do anything. Yeah, I won't be able to reopen it for you to let you answer a bit more. I can't do those kind of things anymore, because these are multiple choice questions. You answer, you submit, you go towards your essay. Yeah, I will not take any more of your time. You can go for your toilet break and so on and so forth. Once you are in Moodle at 5:30, I'm telling you this now so that you don't come and contact me. Why when I click I cannot then see it? Because at 5:30 p.m. you still need to refresh your page. I know some of you will open this and just wait here, but at 5:30 you still need to refresh this. Then it will enable, it will allow you to go in and start answering. Yeah. All right, awesome. Thank you very much. I'll see all of you next year. All the best for your test. Have a good Christmas, have a good break, and I'll see everyone next year. Yeah, take care. I've been saying it a lot of times and Sardar is still asking the same question. So Sardar, the answer is 10 marks. That's your essay. Thank you everyone. Take care. Bye. If you want to ask me something, you can now. Yeah. If you don't have, then you can leave the call.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Bye.